Welcome to the Child Care Director's Chair, the podcast for bold educators who are ready to lead, grow, and shake things up in early childhood education. Whether you're a teacher eyeing that lead role, a lead stepping into leadership, or a center owner dreaming big, this is your space to grow with purpose and leave your mark. Hosted by heart-centered leadership coach Erica Sacoccio, each episode brings you real talk, actionable tools, and a contagious laugh or two, all designed to help you step into your next level with confidence. So pour your coffee, pop in those earbuds, and take your seat, because your leadership journey starts right now in the Child Care Director's Chair.
Hey guys, it's Erica here at the Child Care Director's Chair podcast. We are wrapping up at the main AEYC conference. I have had a great time. So many educators have been on the platform today and yesterday, and I have so graciously have this wonderful gentleman, Dr. Dan Wuori, who was the keynote today, and we're going to talk a little bit about play. We can talk a little bit about his book, and just talk about ECE in general. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Tell folks who are not familiar with your work, which probably most are, but just tell folks a little bit about yourself, how you came to ECE, and just give us a little background.
Yeah, well, I have been lucky enough. I have been in the early childhood field for more than 30 years now. It's painful to say it's been that long, but it has been that long. And I always sort of jokingly say, we talk about the early childhood career ladder, that I have been at every rung of the career ladder. I began my career in a child care program, in an after school program many years ago now. Was a kindergarten teacher, a school district administrator. For about 15 years, I was the deputy director and sort of de facto chief of staff at South Carolina's early childhood agency. After that, I founded the early childhood policy work at a place called the Hunt Institute in Cary, North Carolina. It's a think tank that works on education policy with governors and state lawmakers primarily. And in the past 2 or so years, I have spun off my own consultancy. It's called Early Childhood Policy Solutions, and I continue to consult and work with policymakers through that. The reason that I am here, though, at Maine AEYC is that I am the author of a book that came out about a year ago called The Daycare Myth: What We Get Wrong About Early Care and Education and What We Should Do About It. And so I have spent a good bit of time this past year traveling around not only the country, but the world, talking about this book.
That sounds very fun and very exciting. And I love that. And I love when somebody who has as much impact as you has actually worked in a classroom and can really understand, right? Because that's not always the case. Sometimes it's folks that have learned it in a textbook, which nothing wrong with that, but haven't really lived it.
Well, living it is important in this case. And it's, I will say I have enjoyed, all the different facets of the early childhood field that I've been able to encounter in my career, but I've never had, and I don't think I will ever have, a better job than teaching kindergarten.
Yeah.
So I still consider myself very much at heart a
kindergarten. And I love also voices of males in early childhood education. I very much appreciate them, and every time I find one, I bring them to my mic.
Well, we are definitely few and far between. The part of my story that I didn't tell you is I came across this very much by accident. And it's funny, as I talk with other men in the field, that lots of them have similar stories. In my case, my bachelor's degree is in journalism, and I was working in radio. And I was working for a very early morning shift, and a close family friend, actually our next door neighbor as we were growing up, ran this after school program and called me in a panic one day. One of her staff had resigned, and she knew that I worked very early in the mornings, and sort of by like early afternoon was finished there. And so she called and just asked, could I come that afternoon? Just, maybe for a day or two, could I come and fill in until she could fill this vacancy? Well, lo and behold, I think I filled the vacancy, but it took me just a minute, to realize, like, I have made a terrible mistake in life, and I am meant to work with kids. such a joyful experience, to step into this classroom of 5 and 6-year-olds in that case, and
Yeah.
just to see their enthusiasm and their kind of passion for learning, and also just their brilliance. I was so blown away that first day about how much these kids knew about, especially topics that they were really personally passionate about, whether it was, dinosaurs or trucks or what. I mean, just that, um, they knew so much about so much, and it really sparked my interest in young children and their learning.
Yeah, me too. I used to sell furniture,
Oh wow!
and I ended up in a school age program,
Yep.
and the rest is history 27 years later.
Wow.
So one of the things you're most known for is your advocacy work around play, especially reminding adults that play is learning. So for childcare directors and teachers who are under the pressure to show academic results, what would you say to them about the importance of protecting play in their programs?
Yeah, no, I think look, we can't overstate. I mean, play for young children is learning. It is an expression of their learning, and it is a method through which they learn and try on, different, whether it's different language or scenarios, or the imaginative play in particular is so important for young kids. And there is definitely that challenging balance. I think, to me, it's a matter of helping parents and other adults really understand this idea. I think we all want the same thing for kids, which is, we want them to be successful and happy. And, for young, we want them to go to school well prepared. It's interesting, though. I mean, even just sort of reflecting back to my kindergarten roots, if we were to ask just random strangers walking down the street, like, what do you think are the, um, what do you think are the most important things for a child to know coming into kindergarten, right? I mean, my guess is that many parents and many, kind of non-educators on the street would say, "Oh, well, they need to know the alphabet, or they need to know to count to 10." If you ask teachers that same, if you ask kindergarten teachers, what do you think is most important for children coming into kindergarten? I think you would find very rarely that would they even mention those
Yeah.
basic academic things, that a lot of what they would stress is interpersonal sorts of skills and social emotional skills. And, do they have they had experience sharing with other kids, for
Yeah.
example, and, things related to attention span, maybe. But, when kids have had those experience, when they know how to get along with others, to share and to play cooperatively, those academic things, I think teachers would tell you, are simple, right? Like, give me kids who come ready to work together and play together. Those academic things are,
Yeah.
very minor in the grand scheme of things. And not that they aren't important building blocks,
Sure.
but
Right.
to teach them is not nearly as challenging as, some of those other skills that we were talking about. And so many of those are developed through play, right? The children learn to cooperate and
Mhm.
take roles, and all of those things by actually living through it through play. Um, in particular socially with peers. And
Yeah.
so, I think, a lot of teachers would say that. And I think it's important for us in the field to be able to articulate that to parents
Yeah.
and say, "Look, we're coming from the same place. We both want your child's
Right.
success, but trust in me when I tell you,
Yeah.
their success doesn't come from filling in worksheets, or, that
Yeah.
that sort of thing."
Yeah.
So,
So, what misconceptions do you often see when people talk about school readiness?
we talked a little bit, certainly the content part of it. In terms of school readiness, the premise of this whole book, though, is sort of about misconceptions
Mm.
too, not necessarily about school readiness, but in, just about the
Education
about
in general.
educate well, and
Yeah.
about the importance of the early years. I think
Yeah.
we fail to recognize, and we probably not us as a field, right? I mean, I
Sure.
think people in
We
early
get it.
people in
We
early
get it.
childhood get it pretty well. But for a lot of parents, a lot of policymakers continue to not get the importance of the period from prenatal to 3, for example. That with the policymakers that I work with, very frequently I hear this idea that we need children to come to school ready to learn, as though learning begins at 5. And we know so well that that's not the case. That increasingly we have this amazing body of evidence that young children are learning even before they enter the world, right?
Yeah.
That they're starting to pick up on the tone of their mother's voice and the rhythms and the patterns of her native language in utero before they enter the world. And that changes everything really about our system. It changes sort of how we value the people who work in this field, how we train them, how we compensate them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of implications for our misunderstanding of the importance of the early years. And that's kind of what the book is about, is that misconception.
Yeah. So you've spent a big part of your career shaping early childhood policy. I know a lot of our listeners are wondering, like, how these decisions actually impact their day to day. Can you help maybe break down what's happening right now?
Yeah,
And
well, I
early,
mean, I can give you a really good example in terms
okay.
that I think I know you have a lot of center directors, obviously, who
Yeah.
are in the audience. One thing that we have seen play out over a period of decades is I don't want to explain. It feels bad even coming out of my mouth, but the sort of the encroachment of our public school system into the early years. And I say that with care, in the sense that we know that many of these public school programs, if not most of them, are fantastic. They're it's not a quarrel with that. But what we know is that historically, the years of early childhood have not been the domain of public school districts, and that it has been private child care and church preschools and Head Start programs and all sorts of community-based early childhood providers that have provided that service. And the economics of childcare are such that, as you know well, and your audience will know well, it's almost impossible to provide infant care at a profit.
Right.
Or even really to break even from a business
It's a loss
perspective.
leader all day long.
It's a loss leader. And so, the way that the childcare industry is able to stay afloat uh, at the center level is that, slightly older preschoolers that can be served in larger numbers are what enable that,
To be able to provide
the
infant toddler
provision of
care.
infant toddler care. And so, as school districts have expanded in a way that, first, brought children into 5-year-old kindergarten now in most cases,
Yeah.
decades ago.
Yeah.
But more recently, as school districts have, or as states have expanded pre-kindergarten programs, what we have seen is that, depending on the approach, that can work well or it can work not so well for the,
Sure.
for the early childhood community. I am a big advocate of what is known as mixed delivery pre-K, which means basically just that school districts aren't the only ones who can provide that. The state, also has the ability to contract with those community-based providers that are there and have been there for
Yeah.
so many years.
Yeah.
And if all 4-year-olds, for example, end up sort of siphoned out of that private and community-based ecosystem, then we really pose a giant threat to the availability of infant toddler care. And so
Yeah.
that's talk about a big policy issue, is working with states on how to thoughtfully, know that I don't have any quarrel with pre-K. In fact, I help to support it and deliver it in South Carolina. But how that's done, it's one of those the
Well,
devil's in the details sort
yeah,
of
and I
questions.
think if it's really truly also to support families, right? Let's talk about school for a sec.
Yep.
And this is 100% disclaimer. These are Erica's thoughts and ideas. I will not drag Dan into
Sure,
it.
sure.
But my thoughts are, if this is truly about helping families, right? Schools are not open year round. So I'd like to know what's the plan for the 4-year-olds and the 3-year-olds when schools close, and vacations weeks, and teacher professional development days, and snow days, and all the days that we as early childhood providers have been known to be consistent care throughout the year, right? And I also think it's very difficult if you are a young family, you have an infant and a preschooler, and so now they're now in two different places, right? And there's transportation of young children, right? There's a lot of other questions, I think, that come up when we say if pre-K is going to be 100% in a school system. I don't know that that works for all families.
No, it doesn't. And, when that's why we need these mixed delivery systems, and we need in the early years in particular, really robust forms of school choice too. That
Yeah.
one size does not fit all for families, and that's especially true during the early childhood years. That we in the same I faced this in sort of leading this structure in South Carolina. Was I don't want to be in a position of telling a family where they have to go, right?
Sure.
For some, if you are a parent of a 4-year-old who has an infant who is in a center-based program, it might be the right thing for your child to be in the same program as the infant sibling. On the other hand, it might make great sense if if you have another child that's a third grader to do it in the public school.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we know, I mean, it is a fact at this point that consistency of care for young children is important. So if we don't have that consistency of care, like I said, I mean, a school age kid can easily go to summer camp or, have a day here or there, vacation weeks with someone else. But when you're talking with younger children, the impact of that for a 3-year-old looks different than it would for an 8-year-old. So, what do you wish policymakers understood about the reality of the childcare work?
Well, I think that the thing that I wish that they understood the most, first off, is just how critically important the period from prenatal to 3 is for us as human beings, right? That this is the period of time during which the fundamental architecture of the brain is being wired in ways that will either go on to support our success in school and in life, or maybe not so much. And so, I think I just choked on something. The more they understand, I think there's always a question of the cost of more investment in young children. And the case that I have been trying to make here to the room today, but also to policymakers, is we're really already paying for the system that we need for children and families. We're just doing it in, frankly, the dumbest possible ways, right? That we seem content to pay for more prisons. We pay for worse K-12 outcomes. We pay for worse health outcomes and more adults who are dependent on social welfare programs in adulthood. Not that we need to be getting rid of those programs, but we know that if we invest wisely in young kids early in their life, that the research evidence suggests that we won't have the same kind of need for that, right? That these are programs that have improved health and education outcomes, that prevent kids from getting into the criminal justice system. That we could meaningfully sort of shrink the overall size of government by just being thoughtful about getting things right in the first place.
Yeah. All right. So as we start getting closer to the end, because I know you're a busy guy and I really appreciate your time, let's talk about the workforce. We know that early childhood educators are the backbone of our programs, but they're also burning out at alarming rates. So from your perspective, what's the heart of the retention crisis and what can leaders do right now to start turning that around?
Well, that's a great. Maybe I'll break that into two kinds of responses. I think fundamentally at the heart of the retention crisis, it is a compensation crisis. I mean, I think I shared earlier with the group here that the median pay for an infant toddler teacher in the country, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is $13.22 an hour,
Wow.
which is, according to that same data set, 59 cents an hour less than we pay dog walkers in this country, if you can believe that. And so, what that leads to is a huge amount of attrition in the field. I mean, I think there's not a centralized way of keeping up with this data, but the estimates that I have seen is that 25 to upward of 40% of of teachers in the, what we would call the childcare sector leave the field entirely every year. And that has only become worse in recent years, I think, as the labor market has tightened kind of both during and after the pandemic. What we've seen is that the fast food restaurants and big box stores and things have adjusted their own starting pay. When McDonald's needs adults to come fill roles, they might not want to pay more money, but they have the ability, if that's what it takes to get employees into their restaurants, they can do it. Whereas, in the childcare sector, as so many programs are operating on just such razor thin margins,
you're telling me,
that we don't have the ability to. So anyway, the compensation is job number one, but that at some level is a policy question. I mean, the childcare market is so broken that I am a believer that we need public funding, and that there are places like Washington, D.C., for example, that has, they have created what they call their pay equity fund, that is helping to lift up the pay of teachers in the sector to the tune of about $14,000 a year.
Yeah.
Right here in Maine, there is a salary supplement in place that is not quite as robust as DC's, but is approaching and at some levels, maybe half of that or 40% of that. I mean, it's still
Rhode Island too has done
a substantial bump. So I think policymakers need to get involved in the compensation debate. We in this country, we subsidize many different industries that we deem too important, or the phrase they always use is too big to fail, right?
Yes.
That when the airlines are in trouble, or the banks are in trouble, or agriculture is in trouble, we subsidize that, and we need some level of public subsidy for closed and retention. I don't see how center directors, I mean, maybe there are ways that center directors can be particularly thoughtful about their budgets and
sure, but
to maximize,
nickels,
but to really solve this problem, I think we need a public policy solution. I think at the center level, it's interesting. One of the things that I advise parents in this book is on how to select a center for your child. One of the things I advise them is to go and seriously go visit the classroom in question, right? Not just sort of pop your head in the door and walk through for 30, sit down for 30 minutes. And what I advise that they need to be looking for in particular is watch the adults in the room. And if you walk into a classroom and what you see during your time there is two adults who mostly are off in a corner talking to one another, that's a big red flag. If instead you walk into a classroom, and it may take you a minute to even figure out where the teachers are, right? Because they're down on the floor, they're interacting with the kids and extending their language. That's a great sign that those interactions are more important than just about anything. But in terms of picking a program more broadly, one of the things that I sort of suggest is maybe have kind of an interview with the director, and that there are some things that you can ask, and that one of those things is, how long have your teachers been here, right? And what's the longest tenure of a teacher? And that,
a lot of parents are asking that question.
And that I think realistically, I even say in the book, don't be surprised necessarily if you find the answer is not very long, right? That if it's a year or two even, but recognizing that we're seeing up to 40% attrition every year. You may not be dazzled by this answer, but I always love talking with programs where when you find out that there are teachers that have been there for 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, something's going right there in terms of just the of the place. So I think that center directors play a really important role, and it's maybe it may be hard on the financial compensation front, that centers can do as much as they can there, but boy, center directors can play a huge role in developing the right culture and a respect. Teachers know where they are
valued, heard, and
really
seen.
valued and heard and seen and respected. And so, I think that's something we can't overstate for center directors, right? That they're the kind of instructional leader, but also like the cultural leader of their program. And, the way that they express, the way they back their teachers, the way they express appreciation for them, I think really goes a long way toward maybe mitigating a little bit of that really high turnover.
All right. So my last question is, as someone who has seen the field evolve over decades, what gives you hope about the future of early childhood education?
It's a good question. I do, one of the things that gives me a lot of hope, working in the policy part of the conversation, um, is one that I feel like we're doing a good job as a field in helping policymakers to get kind of the brain science part of this, to the point that I was making earlier about we've already got the money in the system, we're just spending it the wrong ways. That's what increasingly policymakers are saying to me. I kind of get this now. Even people who maybe would have told you a couple of years ago that this wasn't their thing. That they're appreciating more and more, I think, how important the early years are. They're just struggling through what do we do about it at the policy level. The other thing that is really encouraging to me, having worked with policymakers all across the country, no secret and probably not a controversial thing to say that, sometimes looking at our national politics right now, things can seem pretty bleak, right? That there's right now, as we are having this conversation, we're in the middle of a government shutdown that, the House of Representatives hasn't even been in session for almost a month at this point. The partisanship and, I mean, it's easy to look at our national politics and think, oh boy, are we ever kind of hopelessly broken. But the work that I have been doing around the country, in both red states and blue, really gives me a lot of hope that at the state level that we see much more bipartisan kind of collaboration, and that we see that this is a priority. Early childhood is a priority. Young children are a priority across any sort of partisan divide. When we poll voters, that the numbers are just off the charts. The number of voters that regardless of political party, if you ask questions about should we invest more in young kids, the answer is generally yes. And the good news is we've got examples from all across the country where in red states and blue, that there are governors and there are state legislatures that are really leading for kids. So I do see, as little progress as it sometimes seems, can be coming out of Washington, D.C., a lot of really interesting progress is being made by the states. And
So as we wrap it up, as I had started earlier and saying, thank you for being a male educator, using your voice. One of my listeners, his name is Trevor Newton, is a big fan of your work. And he listens to this podcast all the time. So if you could give Trevor some words of advice, being a male educator, what would they be?
Well, can you tell me more about what does Trevor?
Trevor
do?
runs a program. I think it might be a state-funded pre-K program. Not sure exactly how it's funded, but he is incredibly advocating for play, especially big play. Like I guess maybe that's not the right word. Big body play.
Yeah, like gross. Gross motor.
Big, yes. Risky fun play. He's a big advocate for that, and he speaks and he goes around and he works with special needs students, and he's just a really great guy.
Well,
and he's from Colorado.
Okay. Well, I would say to Trevor and maybe to other
I'm sure there's more than one
to other males as well. And I mentioned my own story, and I feel like sometimes it's important to share that I as much of a profile, I guess, as I have, to be here keynoting at the main AEYC conference, to really highlight that this happened almost by mistake for me, right? That there was some real serendipity involved in the fact that I am in this field. And I am a real believer that if more men just had a little bit of exposure to how joyful and wonderful an experience it is to work with young children, that we would see lots more
Yeah.
men in the field. And it's
Yes.
because it's so funny that I'm not exactly the same story, but I have found, with a lot of male colleagues in the field, when I ask them, how did you get started in this? There is some aspect of something happened, someone in
Yep.
particular that roped them into, getting some exposure, and that changed everything, right?
Yeah.
And so, I would say to men, prospectively, if this is a field that you're interested in pursuing, boy, it's a great one.
It is.
And to other, it can be tough. There are some unique parts of being a male in an overwhelmingly female field, and so I guess I would say, keep it up, keep your chin up. I can think of students, for example, who maybe didn't have both parents in the home, for
Yeah.
whom having a positive male role model, I think, is really important. And so it's a special honor to be
Yeah.
able to play that role in a very gratifying
Yeah.
thing.
And it's interesting. A lot of people will go to that. And sometimes they'll say, even if a child has two great parents who are role model, right? Can't you have more than one great role model?
Yeah,
You
of course,
can,
of
right?
course.
You can. So thank you again so much. Where
You're
can
so
people find your
You
your
can
work?
find anything related to me on my website, which is just my name, Dan Wuori, WUORI.com, and all of my social media information is there. The book,
So that's where we'll
and
find
other
you.
news. So danwuori.com.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
And
Eric.
for all of you listening, as always, this is where leaders go to grow. See you later.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Child Care Director's Chair, where we believe leaders aren't born, they're grown. If something sparked for you today, share it, shout it out, or pass it along to the next bold changemaker in childcare. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected with Erica Sacosio for more real talk leadership tools and a whole lot of inspiration. Until next time, lead with heart, grow with fire, and always remember, the chair is yours. Now own it.